by material desires and surrender unto demigods to follow their particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. So, continuing today's, Srila Prabhupada quoting this, he says, as long as a person is illusioned by material gains, he petitions the respective demigods to draw some particular benefit, which is, after all, illusory and non-permanent. The enlightened transcendentalist is not captivated by such illusory things. Therefore, he is always absorbed in the transcendental thought of the Supreme in different stages of realization, namely Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. In the previous verse, it is suggested that one should think of the super soul, which is one step higher than the impersonal thought of Brahman, as it was suggested in the case of contemplating the Virat Roop of the personality of Godhead. Intelligent persons who can see properly may look into the general conditions of the living entities who are wandering in the cycle of the 8,400,000 species of life, as well as in different classes of human beings. It is said that there is an everlasting belt of water called the river Vaitarani at the entrance of the plutonic planet of Yamaraj, who punishes sinners in different manners. After being subjected to different sufferings, a sinner is awarded a particular species of life according to his deeds in the past. Such living entities are punished by Yamaraj as seen in different varieties of conditioned life. Some of them are in heaven, and some of them are in hell. Some of them are brahmanas and some of them are misers. But no one is happy in this material world, and all of them are either class A, B, or C prisoners suffering because of their own deeds. The Lord is impartial to all circumstances of the sufferings of the living entities, but to one who takes shelter at his lotus feet, the Lord gives proper protection, and he takes such a living entity back home, back to himself. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananjana Sharakya Chakshur Unmiritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Putali Swayam Rupakadah Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Datpatakam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamshta Shri Rupam Sagarzatam Sagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sujivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Pujana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakant Vitamshta He Krishna Karuna Sindhudina Banujagat Pate Gopi Shakopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusate Devi Pranamami Hare Pre Vanshakapatu Bhyashta Kripasundubi Vachapatita Napam Pavane Bhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putra Ishmati Bhaktivikasa Swami Itanamane Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putra Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Itanamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pasharne Nirvashesha Shunavari Pashchadyate Shitarne. So here in this verse, who else but the gross materialist would neglect such transcendental thought and take to the non-permanent names only, seeing them as the people fallen in the river of suffering as the consequence of accruing the result of their own work. So, here, Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport, the beginning, this gradual process of describing meditation upon the Lord is going on, and the impersonal, this description of the impersonal Virata form has concluded, as Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, and now this description of the Supersoul is begun, specifically in the next verse, in the coming verses. The next verse is one of my favorites in the Bhagavatam, describing the Supersoul and like this, and how he has lotus-like eyes, his lotus feet, his toenails, etc. Like this, very beautiful verses. And so here, Shukadev Goswami, well, there's a few points made. Shukadev Goswami, he's decrying those who neglect this path of self-realization and just take to either has been mentioned before or will be mentioned later. I'll confuse these initial chapters of the second canto. This world of names, only taking to these impermanent names only. Asatim Nama, simply adopting these impersonal, temporary names and temporary forms to be reality, having fallen in the river of suffering. So I'll try to systematically go through the purport a little bit. One interesting point I noticed here is that in the Sanskrit, it's Rite Pashun Asatim Nama Kuryat. So this Pashun, Srila Prabhupada translates as materialists. But if you look at his word-for-word translation for the rest of the Bhagavatam, Pashun means animals actually. So, and Srila Prabhupada brings it out in the purport, but Srila Goswami, he's saying here, who else but an animal will neglect this process of self-realization and just adopt this world of temporary names alone, effectively? So Srila Prabhupada, he says the same thing. He brings out this point of animal, that's those who worship demigods to the exclusion of the Supreme Personality of God, are just like animals, because they're led, just like an animal is blindly led to a slaughter, even though he sees it, so too the general mass of people, they're led to a slaughter, even though they see it. There's one verse in the Mahabharata, I don't quite know the Sanskrit, but it's Maharaj Yudhishthira, I believe he's asking Yamaraj, is it? What is the most wonderful thing? And Yamaraj replies, the most wonderful thing is that so many people are dying every day, but still each individual, each person thinks to themselves, I'll never die. Nobody considers their death. Srila Prabhupada gave the example just how in India you see there's a goat, a farm herdsman or a cow herdsman or a farm herdsman, he will be a shepherd, yeah. He will be slaughtering his goats, and one goat will see another goat get slaughtered, he'll be in line for the slaughter, but he'll just stand there eating the grass. So similarly, the materialists, the pashuns that are being talked about here, the materialists of this world are exactly like that. Everybody in this world has a limited span of life, and that point is brought up earlier, I believe. What is the use of a prolonged life wasted by years in the world? So everybody has a limited span of life within this human form, and death is, I mean, practically speaking, if we analyze objectively, it's almost like a day. We're exposed to it almost as if a daily affair now, especially from the tiny forms to things like, so many different insects, microbes, etc., are dying every day around us just by our activities. And now, due to the popular mass media, we see on the news practically every day, actually, somebody has died. There's been some killing, there's been some mass shooting, there's been some tragedy, there's some war going on. And we hear about death almost on a daily basis. But the mind is such, and the conditioned soul's nature is such, that he doesn't consider these things. Even though he sees it, he's just like the goat who eats the grass, who just carries on eating the grass nicely while his friend is being slaughtered. So similarly to the gross materialists, even though that death is there, as there for them, as they're around them, and as they're coming for them, they just are completely absorbed in this temporary world of names. And, well, Srila Prabhupada will bring this point out later, but none of this absorption, none of their activities, neither will release them from the process of death, nor will it actually give them any sense of happiness. So, continuing on here, the materialists, like animals, they do not know that they are being misdirected by neglecting the transcendental thought of the Supreme Person. I'm just trying to think of an example. So, it's the mass of people in this world, antayutandir upaniyamanas, it's the blind leading the blind. And they don't know they're being misdirected. They don't know that their real self-interest lies in Svartakatim Vishnu. Their real self-interest lies in remembering Vishnu. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would, what was that? I'm just forgetting the words he would use. But he would describe this as people in general, it's something as acting against their own swarta, acting against their own self-interest in this world, having turned their face away from their own real interest in this world. And instead, they take to so many different processes which are actually directly against their real, what's actually valuable for them, or what actually lies within their self-interest. So Srila Prabhupada says, no one can remain vacant of thought. It is said that an idle brain is the devil's workshop, because a person cannot think, who cannot think in the right way must think of something which may bring about disaster. So this point here, Srila Prabhupada especially emphasizes this point a lot in the early, particularly second canto when he's in America, that we have to be engaged in something. We have to have some process of some form of meditation. And for the materialist, that meditation is a meditation upon the objects of sense gratification, the opposite sex, money, etc., like this. But the real meditation, the real object of meditation is the lotus feet of the beautiful Supreme Personality of Godhead. The mind's nature is that, Srila Prabhupada says here, no one can remain vacant of thought. It's, actually, in today's world, it's a very amazing statement because there's so many different, practically there's a whole culture now that wasn't there in the West even, I don't know, even 20, 30 years ago. Now there's a whole culture in the West of completely emptying the mind. And you see, I was just, when we were at this phone store, I noticed on this, what is it, Apple Watch, they have a mindfulness app. And basically, I mean, anyway, there's some nonsense there, but basically the text of the app and the purpose of the app is just to completely eliminate the mind of any sort of thought. I mean, even this word mindfulness actually comes from Buddhism. It's been somehow adopted from Buddhist teachings into Western culture and been perverted a little bit to, in a sense, rather than, the original intention is still there, but regardless, it's this idea, the same shunyavad tendency is there, just emptying the mind of everything. But Srila Prabhupada, he just plainly says here, no one can remain vacant of thought. And practically it's seen, you know, when we point out to people, Srila Prabhupada, he would point out to people, it's easily understood that even when you sit down to do these things, this so-called mindfulness, how long can you actually remain so-called mindful? You're just mindful of your own mental mind just rattling off. You can't actually steady the mind or still the mind. You have to think of something. You know, it seems, I often tell people this, but it seems when you sit down to so-called meditate or practice so-called mindfulness, you become more mental than you were before. Your mind gives you more input and it talks to you more than it was before. When you actually try to quiet the mind, it's almost as if the mind is something like a caged animal. When you try to calm it down, it just gets more and more frantic. So like that, so therefore, Srila Prabhupada says that an idle brain is a devil's workshop. That's when without a proper engagement, people in general, they'll take to all sorts of nonsensical things. And I mean, you could elaborate on this a ton. This is practically the whole issue of modern society, that people, Shudras and low-class men, are given freedom, meaning freedom of time, freedom of finances, and with their idle brains, they're manufacturing so many different demonic things and wasting their human forms of life. And Srila Prabhupada, he says, particularly in regards to Indian culture or Vedic culture, he says the materialists are always worshiping some minor demigods. Although this is condemned in the Bhagavad Gita. As long as a person is illusioned by material gains, he petitions to the respective demigods to draw some material benefit, which is, after all, illusory and non-permanent. So in the West, it's not so much applicable for us, but even then we see at least those people from India, those residing within Indian bodies who have come to the West, they still, actually, demigod worship is very prominent among them because usually they come to the West with material desires, and they do carry on religious activities. They carry it on, and they worship demigods only for the interest of fulfilling some sort of material desire. Just like Vishnu Chitta Prabhu, I remember he mentions there's on Sarasvati Puja, the day of basically worshiping Sarasvati and praying to her that you will get good, nice grades in school, you'll pass your exam like this, etc., etc. And there's so many other different things there in Vedic culture. People worshiping Shiva for different benefits. People worshiping Goddess Kali, etc., like this. Even approaching Lord Vishnu for material benefits, although that's a little bit different. So Srila Prabhupada, he continues, as long as a person is illusioned by material gains, he petitioned the respective demigods to draw some particular benefit, which is, after all, illusory and non-permanent. So the same point of asati nama, impermanent names only. Materialists, they approach demigods for some sort of, I mean, if you take the example of praying to Goddess Sarasvati for good grades, a high education, etc., like this, to pass an exam. What are you praying to her for? You're just praying to her for an illusory name, actually. You're praying to her for 100 on your test. That 100, neither it has any sort of significance in your life, nor does it actually indicate how much you've actually learned. It's just an impermanent name only, which has no value. And it's temporary as well, just like I At one point, all of us were in school. At one point, all of us were taking tests. Now, what is the use of all those grades we had, all those hundreds we had on the tests, and all the 40s we had on the tests? It's completely useless now that we've taken to the real process of Krishna consciousness. It doesn't have any sort of bearing on our real identity and real engagement. So the enlightened transcendentalist is not captivated by such illusory things. Therefore, he is always absorbed in the transcendental thought of the Supreme in different stages of realization, namely Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan, Shrinvan, Grindan, Smarasmayam, Shtashintyan, Namani, Rupani, Shamangalani, Te, Kriyasu, Yes, Twachtaranara, Vendur, Avishtachitan, Nabhavaya, Kalpate. That he's due to always being absorbed in the transcendental thought, a devotee, a transcendentalist, he's always absorbed in in the thought of the transcendental Supreme Lord, even though he may be engaged in various activities. In the previous, and of course this comes, namely Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan, Vadanti Tattva Vedas, Tattvam Yajnana Madhvayam, Prameti Paramatbeti, Bhagavanditi Shabdyate. Otherwise, all of our activities are Ataphumbir Dvijashreshtash Varnashama Vibhagasha Swanustita Satharamasa Samsidir Haritoshanam. The perfection of all of our activities is to remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, it's just shrama evahi kevalam. It's just useless labor only. In this verse, it is suggested that one should think of the Supersoul, which is one step higher than the impersonal thought of Brahman, as was suggested in the case of contemplating the Rat Rup of the personality of Godhead. So this point has been touched on in previous classes, and that this Shukadeva Goswami, he's elaborating upon the gradual process of realization, and now he's elevated to the conception of Supersoul. And later, we'll see him elevate even further to the go past the Supersoul, and I just turned to the verse. Bhagavan Sarva Bhuti Shu Lakshita Svatmana Harihi. Exactly. Talking about Bhagavan, he who is Hari. So now we're on the Supersoul, going past the Virat form of meditation. So intelligent persons who can see properly may look into the general conditions of the living entities who are wandering in the cycle of the 8,400,000 species of life, as well as the different classes of human beings. It is said that there is an everlasting belt of water called the river Vaitarani at the entrance of the plutonic planet of Yamaraj, who punishes the sinners in different manners. So there's interesting, Srila Prabhupada used this word plutonic here. Plutonic either means within the earth, like deep within the earth, or it can be taken in relation to the planet Pluto. It seems, I don't know quite which meaning Srila Prabhupada is taking here. I assume he's using, is down, down, but also distant. Yeah, I assume he's meaning that here.
Almost like invisible.
Some gesture? Yeah. Who punishes the sinners in different manners. So this river, Vaitarani, I looked this up and some information regarding this. It may be hard for you to pull up, so it's a long verse too. So I'll read the English because this comes in the 5th canto and it's in prose. So there's a description of this river there. A person who is born into a responsible family, such as a kshatriya or a member of the royalty or a government servant, but who neglects to execute his prescribed duties according to religious principles, and thus who becomes degraded, falls down at the time of death into the river, and the river of hell known as Vaitarani. The river, which is a moat surrounding hell, is full of ferocious aquatic animals. When a sinful man is thrown into the river Vaitarani, the aquatic animals there immediately begin to eat him. But because of his extremely sinful life, he does not leave his body. He constantly remembers his sinful activities and suffers terribly in that river, which is full of stool, urine, pus, blood, hair, nails, bones, marrow, flesh, and fat. So this river that's being described is a horrible situation that exists in the heavenly planets, but Shukadeva Goswami, he's taking it here that all of these conditions, these pashuns, these animals, two-legged animals existing, or animals and two-legged animals, all the conditioned souls existing within the material world, they may as well have been fallen into the river of Vaitaranyam. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he compares this material world to a pit into which people pass stool. So it's exactly like that. Even though, I mean, this comes later in the purport, but Srila Prabhupada makes this point. Even though we may be class A, B, or C prisoners, our position is that we've fallen into this river of stool, blood, pus, mucus, etc., like this. And especially, and you could take this literally in the sense that we actually, through our wandering in the material universe, eventually we wind up in the heavenly planets. Eventually we wind up in the human form of life. Eventually we wind up as a reptile, as an animal, as a deer, as a pig, etc. And eventually we wind up in this hellish river. So too, exactly, it could be taken symbolically in that we have fallen into this river, this situation of stool, blood, pus, mucus, etc., in the form of this material body, because that's all that this material body is composed of. It's the source of all our suffering and all of our misery. So, Srila Prabhupada, so this river, I just want to continue this. You can pull this up, Tyrese. 7th canto. I'll read 2 or 3 verses from here. 7th canto, 9th chapter, 41 verse. 41st verse. So this is a verse, a long chapter. 41st. So I'll read from 41, 42, and 43. Maybe 44 we'll see. So, Evan svakarma patitam bhava vaitaranyam anyonya janma marashana ashana pitam pashyan janam svapar para vigraha vaira maitram hantiti parachara pipriha mudha madhya. So this is Prahlad Maharaj, his famous prayers unto Lord Nrsimhadev, and he says, "My dear Lord, you're always transcendently situated on the other side of the river of death." And specifically, he mentions this word, Vaitaranyam. He's mentioning this river of death. This hellish river that Shukadeva Swami is talking about. And I've quoted from the 5th canto. So continuing, but because of the reactions of our own activities, we are suffering on this side. Indeed, we have fallen into this river and are repeatedly suffering the pains of birth and death and eating horrible things. Now kindly look upon us, not only upon me, but also upon all others who are suffering. And by your causeless mercy and compassion, deliver us and maintain us. So 1 second. Just referencing this 5th canto verse. So Prahlad Maharaj, he's saying here, Prahlad Maharaj, he considers himself as having, the time is so short, he considers himself as having fallen into this river as well as others, all his kinsmen, his fellow conditioned souls, so to say, or what he considers fellow conditioned souls, so fallen into this material world. But he is confident of Lord Nrsimhadev's protection here. He's praying that for that here. But now kindly look upon us, not only upon me, but upon also all others who are also suffering. And by your causes, mercy, and compassion, deliver us and maintain us. So you can continue to the next verse. These are really nice purports, but they're really long, and I don't have so much time. So the Sanskrit for these are famous, so I'll read these. Konvatra te kirakuru bhagavan prayasa utarene sya bhava sambhava lopa hetoho muleshu vai mahad anugraha artabandho kim tena te priya janana anusevatam naha. To the translation, O my Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, original spiritual master of the entire world, what is the difficulty for you who manage the affairs of the universe in delivering the fallen souls engaged in your devotional service? You are the friend of all suffering humanity, and for great personalities it is necessary to show mercy to the foolish. Therefore, I think that you will show your causeless mercy to persons like us who engage in your service. So Prahlad Maharaj, these purports are very long, so you may not always pick up on this when you actually read the chapter. But Prahlad Maharaj, there's a string that's going throughout his prayer. So you see, he's petitioning Lord Nrsimhadev here. He's saying, Lord Nrsimhadev, it's very easy for you to engage the conditioned souls in your devotional service. If you want, you can easily deliver them. So I think that you would definitely show your causeless mercy to persons like us who engage in your service. And so the next verse, I'll read. Naivo dviji para dratya vaitaranyas, tvadvirya gayana mahamrita magnachitaha, shochi tato vimukha chitasa indriyarta, maya sukaya param udvahato vimudhan. O best of the great personalities, I am not at all afraid of material existence, for wherever I stay, I am fully absorbed in thoughts of your glories and activities. My concern is only for the fools and rascals who are making elaborate plans for material happiness and maintaining their families, societies, and countries. I am simply concerned with love for them. So it's a very beautiful translation, it's a very famous translation, and even the Sanskrit is equally as beautiful. So this naivo dviji para turatya vaitaranyas. So Prahlad Maharaj is saying that I am certainly not afraid of this duratya, this insurmountable river that is called the Vaitaranyas, this hellish river that we've all fallen. Prahlad Maharaj is speaking, I'm not afraid of this at all. But because I'm constantly absorbed in thoughts of you, and I know that you will surely protect me. My concern is only for those foolish rascals who have also fallen into this river. I'm simply concerned with love for them. So I may as well just read the next one because it's also famous, the verse after this. Prayena deva munya sva vimukta kama maunam charanti vijanena pararta nishtaha naitan vihaya kripanam vimukasya eko nanyam tvadasya shranam pramato nupashye. Okay. My dear Lord Nrsimhadev, I see that there are many saintly persons indeed, but they are interested only in their own deliverance. Not caring for the big cities and towns, they go to the Himalayas or to the forest to meditate with vows of silence, Maunavrata. They are not interested in delivering others. As for me, however, I do not wish to be liberated alone, leaving aside all these poor fools and rascals. I know that without Krishna consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. Therefore, I wish to bring them back to shelter at your lotus feet. And so the exact same point is reiterated here in Srila Prabhupada's purport, that the Lord is impartial to all circumstances of the sufferings of the living entities. But to one who takes shelter at his lotus feet, the Lord gives proper protection. And he takes such a living entity back home, back to himself. So Prahlad Maharaj is exhibiting here that he considers himself as having fallen into this river Vaitarani, as well, along with all the other conditioned souls of this world. He counts himself among them. But Prahlad Maharaj, he has this attitude of, he is confident of Krishna's protection. Avashya Rakshibi Krishna Vishvasa Bhalan. He knows that Krishna will protect him. And therefore he's petitioning Krishna for assistance in delivering the innumerable conditioned souls of this world. Srila Prabhupada, he comments on this and he says, he expands Prahlad Maharaj's mood, you could say. He says, I'm not afraid of this Vaitarani. It is very easy. Because I know simply by glorifying your lordship, I can do that. Harinam, 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 Eva Kevalam. That by this process of meditation upon Krishna, chanting about Krishna, etc., like this, then ourselves, we can lift ourselves up and we can also lift others up. So there's some other points I wanted to hit on. I don't have so much time. I'll just mention it briefly. So Shukadeva Goswami, he specifically spoke this in mind. This verse, he's speaking this verse with this in mind. In the second canto, you can pull up first canto, second chapter, third verse. Second chapter, third verse. Yasvanubhavam kilashrutisara mekam medyatam deepam etitir shatam tamon tam samsarinam kurna yahapurana guhyam tam vyasasunum upayami gurum muninam. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto him, Shuka, the spiritual master of all sages, the son of Vyasadeva, who, out of his great compassion for the gross materialists, who struggle to cross over the darkest regions of material existence, which can also be, is used here to Tama Andam, could be also taken to mean this river Vaitarani, which is arguably one of the darkest, one of the depths of material existence. spoke this most confidential supplement to the cream of Vedic knowledge after having personally assimilated it by experience. So the essence is this, that we can be delivered and we can deliver others from this hellish condition of material life and deliver them from this mentality, as Srila Prabhupada he says here, this mentality that they possess of class A prisoner, class B prisoner, class C prisoner, and actually take them out of the prison by the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and by this process of, by teaching them, delivering the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam. Anartho pashamam sakshat bhakti yogam adokshashe lokasya jananto vidvam chakri sattvatasam hitam. The massive people, the people in general have fallen into are ignorant of spiritual life, effectively. But Srila Vyasadeva, he's compiled this beautiful Bhagavatam for their enlightenment. So, I only have 10 minutes left, so I can end my class there and open it up for any comments or questions or discussion anybody may have now. Yes?
Hare Krishna. So, I was thinking that you were mentioning this word mindfulness is a Buddhist concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because the aim of the Buddhist is to understand that you don't exist. Basically, that everything doesn't exist.
Yeah. They don't incorporate that in the philosophy, though.
So, but they use this word mindfulness, but it's actually
Mindlessness. Yeah.
It's what it is. I mean, what they want to do is make mindlessness, and they want to negate the mind too. It's interesting they call it mindfulness. Mindlessness, which has a funny connotation. Nowadays, there's also now we got this VR thing that we're experimenting with. I'll just show you.
Yeah.
So now they have guided meditation on it, and what I noticed was sometimes there's one thing that we use is it's a yoga practice which helps you put you to sleep, like if you really power nap.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually called yoga nidra. But basically it's a simple process where you kind of gradually calm yourself down and it puts you to sleep really fast, and in about 20 minutes or 25 minutes, but then when you wake up you feel really energized. This is useful when you're really lacking some sleep and you don't have much time to sleep, but you need to catch some short rest. It's very powerful. I found that this guided meditation and that instructions to the same thing is exactly the same. Which is why most people, I guess, when they do the guided meditation, they fall asleep. Because it's literally the same thing. You have to observe your breathing, you have to stop thinking of things, and you observe your breathing and you basically fall asleep. And then I also found it very interesting here that Srila Prabhupada is writing that not thinking in the right way leads to disaster. And he's explaining what this idle mind is the devil's workshop is. Dead already.
Really? So quick?
It's because a person who cannot think in the right way may think of something which may bring about disaster. Which means that unless we actually think of things in a devotional way, even when we're practicing devotional service, if we're thinking of things in not the right way, then it will bring about misery to ourselves.
Exactly.
It's like, for instance, being mental. It doesn't give us any happiness, it gives us misery. We have to somehow bring our mind back to, say like when we're chanting japa, we feel all really mental, you have to just bring your mind back to the chanting, it's what you have to do. I was thinking of so you could have a whole class about that. In so many ways.
Yeah, actually, the same point. Just elaborating on it more. This not thinking in the right way, at least, is a disaster. Too, it could be. You could define when you don't think of the right way. That's a form of madness.
Yeah.
It is actually. The mind is meant to be engaged in Krishna service. When you think of something else, of these other activities, at least a madness, and that madness is exhibited in the fact that people are living like animals, leading their lives towards a slaughter, but they don't think about it at all. It's a form of madness, actually. So we can make a whole class on that. Yeah. Yes.
To piggyback on what you were saying, think about attention
Yeah, I've heard that too. Even now, the original, like, how to say that, the Buddhist idea of mindfulness is also being degraded. You find people or like systems of mindfulness where it's like they don't even like propagate like calming the mind or whatever. They just propagate. What you're saying, you just have to be mindful of what's happening. Now, what good that does is absolutely nothing. But when you take it to Krishna consciousness, is when you chant, when you can be mindful of hearing chanting your rounds, when you can be mindful of the Bhagavatam class, then there's an immense difference, compared to not being mindful when you do those things. So yeah, it's very important. Okay, anything else? Yes.
Like how there's like, I don't know if it's true, but there's people that are kind of enlightened in Buddhist, practice. Like, what state is that? Because I know there's there's the aura of Krishna, and it's like some people dwell in that.
Brahman, personal Brahman. So yeah, you can make some sort of advancement.
That's not good.
They don't say it's Brahman, but effectively, it's, well, Mayavada is like covered Buddhism. The thing is, Buddhists, they say that everything is temporary. I mean, they say that everything is void, but the fact is that Brahman exists. So if they happen to make some sort of, if there is a genuine Buddhist who's actually following the systems of dhyana, etc., which are given in the Buddhist systems, and he has somehow made some advancement, then that, if he's any sort of enlightened, he may have some idea of what is Brahman. They may be described in impersonal Shunyavad language, just like anyway, there's not so much time, I won't get into it. If you see Tibetan Buddhism, basically, there's this idea of Buddha nature, which effectively corresponds with Brahman. They're describing the same thing, just in their own Shunyavad terms. It's just they don't have access, they reject the Vedas, actually, so they can't perfectly put words to what they're describing, and like that, so like that. So.
But they describe it as like a light nirvana.
Yeah, nirvana. That's also coming in the Bhagavad Gita. It's a real stage, not that everything is annihilated, but that impersonal liberation that they talk about, that's a real stage that is given in the Bhagavad Gita. So you can attain that. It's not like negated or anything, but it's not the high. Just like Shukadeva Goswami, he just described in the previous verses, that stage is there, the impersonal conception is there, but higher than that is Super Soul, and higher than that is Bhagavan. So like that.
Would that be called, was it
Moksha. Moksha, yeah. They just say nirvana. Mukti, yeah. Generally mukti, better. Okay. Anything from the Maharaji side? Questions? Okay, yes.
Actually, you have to read those quotes.
Oh, okay.
I forgot to take a printout. Can I text it to you?
Yeah, you can text it to me.
Okay. I don't know. Anyway, I'll just
If you have it, you can pull it up. Do I have it?
no, I'll just send it to you. So you have to read the quote. If we sincerely preach to one person in a day. So what we generally do is we read the title, we read the first paragraph, so it gives a context to the quotes, and then we read if we sincerely preach to one person in a day. That's the quote you have to read. It's a letter to Tejas.
Wow, amazing. Okay, I'll project it here because when I like to like see stuff when I read. So
You can read the title and the first paragraph and then go to this quote.
okay,
Listen to the context to what we're reading. No, the title of
the whole thing. Okay, yeah. If we sincerely preach to one person in a day.
No, title
What?
of the whole document.
Oh, the Sankirtan is our life and soul.
Yeah, and then read the first
Oh,
paragraph.
it is this Sankirtan movement which is the life and soul of our movement. So,
Read the first paragraph.
up here.
Yeah.
The quotes from Srila Prabhupada presented here are in chronological order to give a little feel for the evolution of the Sankirtan and preaching in our Krishna consciousness movement. We can see how wonderfully Srila Prabhupada encouraged his devotees in their preaching efforts, going from street chanting and free pamphlet distribution to book printing and distribution as our most important activity. Hare Krishna. So, if we sincerely preach to one person in a day, I am very much disturbed to hear from you that you have become disturbed in your mind. Do not be disturbed. There is no cause for anxiety. You are doing your best to serve Krishna. That is very much appreciated. So do not lose enthusiasm out of frustration. That will spoil everything. Krishna consciousness means we should always be satisfied and happy. Not that we must work something impossible, becoming overburdened. And then because we are unhappy by so much trouble, we lose enthusiasm altogether and give up hope. No, if too much endeavor is there, that is to be avoided. By all means, we must preserve our spiritual status. That is the point. Not that we are mad after big buildings, many devotees, life members, this, that. No, these are only ways to engage the devotees so they may apply the principles of devotional living to some kind of work for practical realization of these principles. It is not the result of the work we want. If only one person daily, we sincerely preach to such one person in a day, that is sufficient. Never mind big programs. So my request to you is that you do not be bothered by these things. I've instructed Tamal Krishna and Shyamasundar to send you men, so they will do it, rest assured. Krishna does not like to see his sincere devotees suffer or become frustrated or depressed. He will not stand idly by in any such case, so do not fear on that account. Krishna has got some plan for you, always thinking that way, and very soon he will provide everything to your heart's desire. Letter to Tejas, December 19, 1972. So I can like, because I kind of know Tejas Prabhu's like timeline, I can kind of like elaborate on this a little bit more. So basically, there is nobody, Tejas Prabhu, he was the temple president of Delhi. He was like, I think at this time, he was like waking up at like 2 a.m. chanting his rounds, going to Mangalarti, and then like going out to make life members at 6 o'clock until like all the way at night. And there's nobody in the center in Delhi. There's no devotees there. So he would cook, he would go out and like make life members. He would do everything in the temple. You know, presumably he's feeling depressed that all of this is going on. So anyway, Srila Prabhupada is encouraging him here. So that's really funny. Okay.
Prabhupada sent him then,
I don't really know, but from what I've heard, not really.
From what I've heard, well, it seems like Tamal Krishna Goswami was supposed to send men, but from what I've heard, men were sent into Delhi, and then they left Delhi. It was like a revolving door. People couldn't stay. The Tejas Prabhu was like the only person who stayed in Delhi. Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Anshaka Patu Vishta Kripasindu Bhiva Chapati Dana Pamivyo Vaishnavi Namo Namo.